Hello, my fellow strawmen, and welcome back to the Fields of Hay. Today, I want to look at another of the most popular arguments theists bring up to justify their beliefs, the Kalam. It has many different variations, but generally goes something along the lines of, whatever begins to exist has a cause, the universe began to exist, therefore the universe has a cause. There is a sense in which I agree with this argument, but it isn't the way theists generally mean it. If I take the phrase begins to exist to mean in the way familiar to our everyday experience, say the way a tasty dish is put together by mixing and cooking the ingredients, or the way a car is brought into being by assembling its components, then it would refer to things which rearrange their constituent parts into new forms. It would not refer to creatio ex nihilo, from true nothingness. In this sense, I would grant the first premise. Things require some cause to change from one state to another. I would also grant the second premise. Even though we don't know what state the universe was in before the Big Bang, if we take it to be a moment of transition and it ended up as the universe we know now, then the state it ended up in began to exist. Unfortunately for the theist, this results in a cause which is perfectly consistent with the notion of a previous state of the universe, which has itself always existed in some form or the other. It is a perfectly sound and valid argument, but it does not lead to God. On the other hand, begins to exist can refer to something which has come into existence out of nothing, creatio ex nihilo. This is the meaning necessary to derive any supernatural qualities about the cause, and it is the one I understand most theists to intend when they use this argument. Under this meaning, I will again grant premise 1, not because I have empirical evidence for it, but because it appears logically impossible for a transition into existence to happen without any cause. My major issue with the argument then lies with premise 2, because it is outright unsound. I think that it is simply false to say that the universe came into existence. I'll link here to the video I made about the Big Bang, but in summary, there is no evidence that the Big Bang represents the moment at which the universe came into being. Quite the contrary, it is a placeholder term for the earliest state of the universe we know about, which was extremely hot and dense. We simply don't know what came before, and it is utterly irrational to say that before was true philosophical nothingness. Probably the best argument I know for the universe having a beginning is that entropy must increase with time, and there is finite entropy. Since entropy cannot be negative, this would seem to imply that an infinite amount of time could not have passed. However, while it is true to say that the present entropy of the universe is finite, it isn't quite right to say that entropy must increase. There is also a possibility for entropy to stay constant. Such would be the case for any system which reaches its maximum entropy. It wouldn't just pop out of existence because the entropy reached its limit. Interactions would simply cease and entropy would hold constant at the maximum forever. The same thing can happen at the beginning. Whatever entropy the universe had in its primordial form, it could have sat there for the past eternity until the Big Bang marked the moment entropy began increasing. The second law of thermodynamics, strong as it is, does not demand a beginning. A different argument is made by William Lane Craig, he who popularized the modern variety of the Kalam. He claims that the universe cannot be infinite in the past and therefore must have a beginning. To defend the claim, he makes a handful of analogies, but I will not address them directly. The truth is, infinity is such an esoteric concept that I don't feel confident in the points I make in regards to its behavior. It's not that I think my points are wrong, it's that infinity is so difficult to grasp that I'm not certain I haven't missed something. But that is a sword that swings both ways. If I were convinced that actual infinities couldn't exist, I don't think I could hold the conviction with confidence. Founding my belief in God off such an argument seems tenuous at best. So instead of addressing the properties of infinity directly, let me rebut Craig's claim by pointing out an apparent contradiction I see in accepting the premise, which reduces the Kalam to absurdity. Premise 1 we keep the same. Everything which began to exist has a cause. Premise 2 we will expand out. Craig's argument is based on considering the dichotomy that either the universe began to exist or it didn't, and attempting to show that it is contradictory not to have a beginning. We can put this as such. Actual infinities cannot exist. If the universe did not begin to exist, then it is an actual infinite. The universe began to exist. The conclusion, now premise 5, is the same as in the original. Therefore, the universe has a cause. But the exact same dichotomy we applied to the universe, we can now apply to the cause. If the cause did not begin to exist, then it is an actual infinite. Actual infinities cannot exist, therefore the cause began to exist. Therefore the cause has a cause. And at this point it becomes clear that we can keep this analysis going without end. Therefore the cause has an actual infinite set of causes. And an actual infinity exists. Of course, this is contradictory to premise 2, and so the Kalam is absurd. Theists will try to save this version of it by saying that although the cause did not begin to exist, it does not come with an infinite regress. Something along the lines of God creating himself, or simply that he is a necessary being. But both of these answers are completely ignoring the critical dichotomy that sets up the Kalam in the first place. If something has a beginning, then it is finite. If something is beginningless, then it is infinite. Bear in mind the definition that finite simply means bounded, something which ends. Infinite means unending, unbounded. To be beginningless is to be without bound and is necessarily infinite. If one truly wants to be consistent and say that actual infinities can exist, then it follows that it is impossible to be beginningless, because lacking a beginning is necessarily an actual infinity. Following the Kalam, if all things begin, it would then follow that all things must have causes. But then it would follow that there is an actual infinite in the regress of causality. This is the core contradiction of the Kalam, and it makes it clear that actual infinities must somehow exist. Thus, there is no need to rule out the possibility that the universe is beginningless. This, in combination with the conservation of energy, is evidence enough for me to think that the universe did not begin. Modifying the Kalam appropriately, we finally arrive at a version I can agree with. Whatever does not begin to exist is uncaused. The universe did not begin to exist. The universe is uncaused. This conclusion may be unappealing to theists, but I find it quite elegant. This true Kalam is actually the second best argument I know against God, because in spite of the fact that it doesn't rule out God explicitly, it certainly leaves very little room for God to exist outside our universe. To those who think the Kalam does work, I will end on a question for you. If you agree with Craig that actual infinities cannot exist, and you say that the cause of the universe is beginningless, how do you square these two things? How do you understand the cause to be without beginning and yet finite, or infinite and yet existent? Until I hear a response that makes sense to me, this is another argument I'll put on my debunked pile. Thank you all for listening, and please, if you haven't recently, go read a fucking book.